All right, we will go ahead and get started because it's 1 o'clock and we have a lot to get through. And we want to make sure we have some time for questions at the end. My name is Amanda Fisher-Pinner. I'm with the Miller Group. And before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over. First, everyone is muted. And so if you find during the webinar that you have a question you'd like to ask, we will have time at the end for question and answer, so you can send those in to me through the chat, and then we'll save those for the end. And as you notice, today's session is being recorded. After the webinar, either later today or early tomorrow morning, you will get an email with a link to the recording, and it will also have resources that we refer to today during the webinar as well. So without further ado, I have the honor of introducing our moderator, Dustin Carney. Dustin is our Director of Claims for Property and Casualty here at the Miller Group, and he has been in the insurance claims sector for more than 20 years. He specializes in managing complex claims, handling litigation cases, and consulting on a variety of claim types, including property, casualty, general liability, and professional claims. He joined us here at the Miller Group in 2022, bringing his extensive knowledge and skills to the team. So with that, Dustin, I will pass it to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you everybody for sharing some time with us today to discuss naloxone in the workplace. The discussion today is really meant to be a conversation starter. We feel that the prevalence of the opioid crisis, having life-saving measures in our workplace is vital for several different industries and organizations. What we're discussing today could become as important as having AEDs on site. So there's going to be a poll that'll pop up here in just a second for you. And as you look at that poll and submit your answers, I'm going to run through a quick legal disclaimer. So this webinar is not intended to serve as legal advice for individual fact-specific legal cases or as a legal basis for your employment practices. The panelists here today are not attorneys. We don't even play them on TV, but rather we're experts in our fields and are happy to share our experience and recommendations. We always advise that you speak to an attorney prior to implementing any policies or procedures within your company. All right, it looks like I see the poll getting answered here. Okay, judging by the poll results, it looks like you're in the right spot today. We've got some learning to do with this topic, and with that being said, let's jump right into our expert panelist. So first of all, we have Colleen Medrano. She is the Executive Director of RSI and Crisis at Wyandotte Behavioral Crisis Stabilization Center. She has worked in the mental health field for over 20 years with a passion for working in a crisis setting. She helps clients who are in acute crisis and develops a plan to get them back to the community as quickly as possible. Next, we have Aaron Paris. He's our Director of Safety here at the Miller Group. He has more than 6 years of experience in workplace safety and 12 years in law enforcement. He consults with clients on a wide variety of safety issues, such as worker safety, property risk, and other safety procedures. So as we jump into our discussion today, again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat box, and we should have some time at the end of the discussion to get into those. So let's get started. Colleen, can you please tell us a little about naloxone, what it is and why it's used?
Yes, thank you again for joining us today. So naloxone, most people know this as Narcan. Narcan is the brand's name of naloxone. And what it is it's a life-saving medication that can rapidly reverse the effects of opioid overdose. So it comes in 2 different forms. It comes as a nasal spray injection or as an injectable, so a needle injectable. It normally takes about 2 to 3 minutes to come into effect of the person that you administer it to. And, so that's pretty rapid, but it also is definitely a life-saving product that is out in the market And I know that we're going to talk a little bit more about that as our discussion continues. So basically, it's a life-saving medication for overdose.
Perfect. Thank you. And in the situation of an overdose, can you maybe walk us through, what that looks like, maybe what an individual may be showing? Again, we never know when we're going to run into a situation like this, but part of our discussion today is to understand potentially what's going on when we see an individual in distress. So maybe walk us through some of the warning signs that you look for.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to, I don't know how many people are trained in CPR, those kinds of techniques, but if you ever see a person, laying on the ground, whether it's a family member, a bystander, somebody that you run into, you always want to make sure that they're okay by, going up to them, shaking them. Are you okay? Are you okay? Um, Sometimes they are unresponsive. We don't ever know if somebody has overdosed on fentanyl or any other kind of heroin, morphine, things like that. So, so we always want to make sure that we kind of check for some signs. So some of the different signs that we could look at are pupils, pinpoint pupils, small constructed pupils is a sign of opioid overdose. Along with loss of consciousness, somebody looking like they've fallen asleep. Another good sign is their lips and their nails, because of the breathing. Those will turn almost like a blue grayish color. So if you see that on a person, again, you want to side on, could this person be overdosing? Slow, weak breathing, that's also a sign of some form of overdose possibility. Choking or gurgling sounds. Often people talk about these gurgling sounds and people think that they're still kind of breathing, but really it's the lungs kind of losing the air that's left in them. So it comes out as almost like a gurgling sound, like they're choking on their saliva. But what that is that their lungs are actually shutting down and they need immediate help. Again, a limp body, cold, clammy body, and again, the one sure sign is that discoloration of the skin, that grayish, greenish tone. Definitely in the lips and the nails, you can tell first off. So if you see any of those signs in an individual, you definitely want to call 911. And if you have access to naloxone, you definitely want to administer that as soon as possible. It's almost better if you administer that before calling 911, to be honest, because it is definitely a matter of minutes before somebody could die.
Okay, thank you. And based on that description, I think I'm sure others share my same level of potential intimidation in a situation like this. Not everybody is experienced as Colleen with these types of crisis and dealing with these events. So, Aaron, maybe can you jump in and give us an idea, as a bystander, or even if this is something that occurs in the workplace, why you may be intimidated in a situation, and maybe explain a little bit what it looks like and how Narcan or Naloxone is used in a situation where you do think somebody is potentially overdosing.
Sure. Yeah, it would be quite intimidating if you haven't been around somebody who's suffering a medical emergency. And in that moment, being unknown, depending on your training and experience, that can feel quite overwhelming. And that desire to help somebody typically is what overrides, and we step in when we can. And if you have the right tools, will really determine your success rate or not. And that's why if you have Naloxone or Narcan available, that's why it can really help. And that by administering it, you're actually blocking the opioid from receptors from being utilized in the brain and the CNS system, and so you're actually inhibiting it from affecting the injured person. I think we have an image I'll show to kind of help explain, what the administration looks like. And it's very easy. They've tried to do a really great job of coming up with, a process that's memorable. And so if you remember lay, spray, and stay, If you lay them back, you're going to check for the slowed breathing or unresponsiveness, which you would do generally with any first aid. And at that point, if you're using the aerosol version, which is the inhaler type, you would use that by inserting the tip into the nose and then squeezing it, and then you'd be administering it there. And when you do that, you can choose either nostril. And then when you do, use the plunger, it's going to administer the dose. And then additionally, you'd want to call 911. Now, with that being said, there's probably a little bit of apprehension around just what happens now that you've called 911. There may be some concerns about what's the next steps after that. Who's coming? What's going to happen? But if this is a drug overdose, is law enforcement coming? Is there concerns around that? And that may be something in general that I think most people have some concerns about, and we'll talk more about that later. But that's kind of the things that makes it super easy, is that if you have the right tools at hand, this is pretty straightforward of how you can administer it.
Perfect. So I think one question that a lot of people have in this situation is, what if the person that's in distress isn't overdosing? Maybe they're having some other type of medical emergency, whether that be a heart attack or maybe an issue with sugar levels. I mean, you name it. A lot of times when folks like us aren't necessarily used to seeing this, people might be afraid to administer Narcan in a situation. What happens if and when you do administer it, if they're not actually overdosing?
And I think that's a legitimate concern, but I think that's also where you can dispel that a little bit of that myth and fear of that, because unlike other counteracting or counterbalancing systems like epinephrine, if you utilize epinephrine when someone's having an allergic reaction and they're not having an allergic reaction, well, obviously we can have a serious outcome that can happen from that. That's not the case with Narcan or Naloxone, because what ultimately happens is there is no response if you're not actually experiencing any kind of overdosing from an opiate. And so if you administer it to anyone and they're not having any kind of a reaction to an opiate, then nothing occurs. And so it's very safe to administer to anyone in the case that you think they may be experiencing an opiate overdose.
Excellent. So now that we know a little bit about what it does and how it works, a couple of questions for you, Aaron. So where can we get Narcan or Naloxone? If we want to get this as a potential safety measure within our workplace. But in addition, I know we all see it on the news and we hear it a lot about fentanyl and its prevalence, unfortunately, in today's society. What can you tell us about, the testing strips that I'm sure some of us have seen advertised? Are those available at the same places as Naloxone? Where can we get those? Maybe just give us an idea that if this is something that we're looking to implement, where do we go to get the materials?
Yeah, Narcan and Naloxone is prevalently available now. They've done a great job to curb this crisis by making it available. It is no longer needed to have a prescription to receive any kind of Naloxone or Narcan. You can get them over the counter. You can find them at your regional health facilities, health departments. There are nonprofits that are completely devoted to making sure that this is available to people in their communities. You can buy them over the counter at locations such as Target and Walmart, your pharmacies. They've done a really good job of making this very available to the general public. It's so available that you can even go online, say, how can I get Narcan or Naloxone? And sometimes they can mail it to you, and so you can get it not even leaving your house. So it is a very available treatment for a very serious crisis right now.
Excellent. Good deal. So I think the next step and a question that needs to be asked, especially in the workplace, and Colleen, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. I think you have some good information behind it. What does it cost? What does it cost a company? Let's just say, for example, the Miller Group decides to implement a procedure similar to what we're talking about overdose response and so forth. what does that cost look like for a company to get enough, or whether it's 1 dose or 2 doses, whatever is needed of naloxone on site to have readily available in the event that you do need to use it?
Yeah, so I do have a slide that I'm going to show, but I'm going to kind of talk a little bit through this first. I just want to show you, this is what the package of Narcan looks like. If you open it up, there's an easy sheet in there as to how you administer it. So if you guys get these on hand, the sheet that Aaron showed is in this little package. So a few things that I just want to cover in regards to what Aaron talked about and so forth like that. So we get ours from the health department here at Wyandotte Behavioral Health, because we are part of the community, and people can come into our organization and ask for Narcan, and we will give it to them. The one thing that I do want to say is that there is an expiration date that goes along with these, and what I have learned through working in the field, working with the people that produce Narcan, Naloxone, things like that, is although that there is an expiration date, there has to be an expiration date because it is technically a drug. And however, as we know, some drugs do have a shelf life, some don't, some have a half shelf life, things like that. So I just want to let you guys know that even if you have a box of Narcan or Naloxone that has expired and you run into somebody that you may think has overdosed, my ask is that you still administer even though it is expired, because it is still good. The shelf life of Narcan is well beyond what it says on the box. Again, because it's a drug, they have to associate an expiration date with it. So if you guys have some on hand, it's expired, don't throw it out. It still can be used. So along with that, I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about cost, because this was very eye-opening to me when I started working with Naloxone and Narcan. So I hope everybody can see my screen. It says, what is the price to save a life? And so I'm going to just kind of increase this so everybody can see. So when Naloxone first came out, there was one pharmaceutical company that you could get it from. There was one brand's name, and that's all you could get, and that was the Narcan. So the Narcan brand was, that's why everybody knows Narcan, because that is the actual brand name of Naloxone. So what surprised me even more is I've been working with Narcan, Naloxone, the health department, things like that, and just trying to get the word out and letting people know the different ways and availability of what Narcan can look like. Here's what I've discovered. And so the original price of Narcan was $150. And so when it first came out, I mean, that was super expensive. And it does have 2 doses in it. Most people honestly require both doses when you are giving it. So again, you may give 1 dose, but you may have to give a second dose very quickly thereafter. And so when it first came out, it was in this form of a nasal spray, cost $150. And then and so here's kind of what it looks like. To actually make Narcan itself, it costs $21. Okay, and out of that, the raw Naloxone cost is 25 cents. It's the packaging, the device, all of that other stuff that costs the $21. The drug itself is 25 cents per dose. So if you're looking at cost, I mean, it's right. These, again, pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money in regards to what we deal with in saving somebody's life. Out of that cost, out of that $150, they were donating $1 to SUD services, things like that, to again try to help with future overdoses, things like that. So they were putting $1 back into the communities. $11 is service. So again, that looks like overhead, administration costs, inventory pipelines, things like that. And so then the pharmaceutical companies were basically profiting $117 for every one of these Narcan boxes that people bought. So that's a lot of money. So they eventually started dropping prices in 2015 to 2022. It went down by half. So it went down to $75. Because of public interest price, it then fell in 2023 to $48. There is now a nonprofit nasal. It is not called Narcan. It is still Naloxone. It is an off-brand name. That cost is $36, and they donate 10% of whatever they make back into the community to go back to substance abuse services and so forth like that. So they are, so again, if we look at the cost of $21, that takes it down to $15, and they're pretty much putting that money back into the community. So if you ever see off-brand names of Naloxone, I highly encourage you to buy that. But there's still a little bit more cheaper ways of saving a life. And I have to say, when I first heard about the injectable Naloxone, I was like, no way, there's no way. Our company would never go for injecting somebody with a needle, not going to happen. And then when I found out the cost was $3, I quickly sat back and said, I think we're going to make this happen. Because of several reasons. One, it costs $3 versus $48, because at that point, the non-brand had not come out. It has since then. And when I learned more about the injectable and how easy it was, how it's not invasive at all, you don't even have to remove somebody's clothing to get to their skin. All it asks is that you inject it into a fatty part of either their arm, so their upper arm back area, or to the upper thigh. You don't have to remove any kind of clothing. You can stick the needle directly in through their clothing, so forth like that. So if you were to buy the injectable, it comes with a pre-filled vial, and I apologize, I don't have any on me right now, but it's a filled vial. And it comes with a needle all together in a little, it comes with the vial and the needle in a package. And basically you take out the needle, you flip open the tab of the injectable, and you insert the syringe, you get all of the medication that's in there, and you inject it into the person, again, upper arm, upper thigh. And so when I told my leadership staff that the injectable costs $3 compared to $48, they too sat back and said, oh, I think we need to revisit this. And again, as I've gotten more familiar with it, I do believe that we have someone on site now. I know that for our crisis stabilization center, because we do have nurses, so forth like that, that are trained. And again, you don't have to be trained. Just like this, it's on the back of the package on how to administer. We have decided that we will carry some injectable as well. Also because Narcan and or the off-brand has been a little bit harder to get recently, because so many people are now keeping it on hand. I mean, I carry a box in my vehicle, I carry a box in my purse. I have one in my office. And so I always have one on me, because you never know what you're gonna come across out in the community. I've had somebody drive up to our community mental health center on a Saturday. She had overdosed in the car, boyfriend ran in, my nurse ran out and administered Narcan and saved her life. And so it's things that we see, it's things that you're gonna see if you haven't yet. as we hear more and more about it on the news. I know this morning I was just hearing about a father who found his son and 3 of his friends. 2 of the friends and the son were deceased. One of the others was very close to being dead. I believe that they were able to revive that person, and that person is still in the hospital getting treatment. But this is real stuff. People don't understand how potent fentanyl is. And I think that we're going to probably go into that a little bit. But, if not, again, this is a way to save somebody's life. And like Aaron said, if you administer Narcan to somebody or Naloxone to somebody, and it wasn't because of an overdose that they were unconscious or whatever that may be, it's not going to do anything to them. It's not going to hurt them in any way. There's no adverse effects unless you have overdosed. Otherwise, you're not going to even feel a thing happen to you. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I know that we'll have time for some questions and so forth at the end. But that's kind of my spiel on the cost. And again, pretty eye-opening when it comes to the difference between a nasal injection and a syringe injection.
Something
Yeah,
that I talk about, Dustin, here is the, from a standpoint of an organization, every organization is going to need to make a cultural decision or a operational decision of, do we want to, one, provide Narcan or Naloxone? And then if that's the case, do we choose to do an inhalant type, or do we use the actual, the injection type? And I would say that that's going to be dependent on the type of work you're in, your clientele, the business that you have, your employees, their comfortability with what you're doing, and then also cost. I think all those things drive operational decisions. Additionally, there is some considerations that should you choose to use a needle injection, which I think is a viable option, and I think there's a reason you should choose that typically over the other. But there is a needle stick safety and prevention requirement from OSHA that was kind of established to expand upon their bloodborne pathogen programs in the early 2000s, I believe. And in that, they were to address the exposure to sharps and needles and things like that. And due to obviously needles being an injection, and then we're potentially having exposure to someone else's bodily fluids, having a program around what do you do with those used needles? How do we control that exposure to our team, and then disposing of them in a safe manner is going to be something that will probably drive part of your decision of how you're going to administer this life-saving medicine. So.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. That's a really good point, and of course, leave it up to the safety guy to remind us all of OSHA and the other things we have to be thinking of. But jokes aside, that's honestly kind of part of what we want to transition to here just a bit is what does a policy look like, and how do you get started with that type of policy, especially when it comes to something like this. As we said kind of at the beginning, so we would always recommend that you speak to inside or outside counsel before you implement any type of policy, but even more specifically, one where you potentially are administrating some type of drug in this situation. So I think first and foremost is just being thoughtful in your planning, understanding what other policies you may have to have in place. To Aaron's point, if you go the injectable route, you have to have a needle policy or a sharp object policy in place already. So it'd be my recommendation from a risk management standpoint that if you're like, what, this is definitely something we want to do with our organization, we don't have a sharp object policy at this point, I'd shy you away from trying to get that in place along with a Narcan or Naloxone policy at the same time. That's a lot of stuff going on with a very, serious and specific type of issue you're trying to avoid. So just something more to talk about. But I would say this on policies and what companies should have into place. I think first and foremost, you need to have a policy. I don't think this is something where somebody buys a box of Narcan and sticks it in their desk drawer and nobody knows it's there. Nobody knows what to do in a situation. So I think it's like any other work safety risk management type policy is having one in place where everybody understands who's responsible for what and what do we do in a situation if it arises. I think even more importantly is as you're looking into these policies, there are some jurisdictional requirements. Some jurisdictions, do require a report to be made to local health authorities if there's an overdose or if Narcan and naloxone has been administered to an individual. So rather than getting into the weeds on those on today's call, that's something I would say write down. And as you're discussing your policies and procedures with your entities, with your companies, that's definitely something you want to look into just to make sure that, again, if something like this happens, you follow the correct procedure just to avoid any potential issues on the back end of it.
I would also say, Dustin, that and Colleen, chime in too, please. But around your policy and procedures, I think if you've already got your first aid, AED, CPR policies in place, and how you administer first aid in your location, this would be an addendum too. And so you're expanding your first aid policy. And then additionally, generally, you should have a bloodborne pathogen policy. That's going to be just expanded upon as well. And so you're probably only going to have to add a little bit to what you already have established. So I don't want to make anyone feel that it could be insurmountable. And obviously, we're here to help. We're here to help guide you, give you a little bit of policy direction of how those should look and kind of look. And additionally, speaking with your carriers and what they're comfortable with as far as insurabilities, we obviously want to make sure that there is also happy. And then we always want to make sure that your attorneys are involved in anything that could create any kind of liability. Do you have any thoughts on that, Colleen?
Yeah, no, I second everything that you said, Aaron. Again, as we look at policies, and those are ever changing sometimes with what we do. And the way that we look at that is we want to have naloxone available just as readily as we have AEDs available. We also want to train staff on how to use naloxone. So again, as you guys think about having this on hand at your place of work, things like that, there are some trainings that you can get from the local health department, things like that. I don't know where all of you guys are from. I think kind of from all over, but again, if you reach out to your local health department, I know here in Wyandotte County, they will go and they will actually do a presentation of how to administer naloxone, what it does, how it works, all of that good stuff. So that way your team is understanding of what you're using, how you're using it, and all of that good stuff. Again, it is on the box. We showed you a few things today, but if you want to further your knowledge, I would strongly encourage you to do that as well. But I mean, otherwise, again, it's a pretty simple little process. And again, it could save a life.
Yeah, as far as like training, I think, you kind of mentioned like, where is it going to be put? Where does that look like? Where's it housed? Those things get to be really important. If we have an AED, but no one knows where it is, the relevance of it is gone. So if you do adopt this or you are considering adopting it, where will you house this? Where will this be stored? Does everyone have access to it easily? Who will be available to administer it? Is this, the training around that will be obviously recognizing those pieces of the puzzle and trying to make sure everyone's aware of that. And hopefully, you come to a good consensus of, hey, this is going to be right next to our AEDs and right next to our first aid kits. And it'll be separate to that and obviously identifiable and easy to recognize and not be set in there next to the Band-Aids or something to that degree. It would be nice to make sure that it's, available and quickly recognizable when needed.
So, one thing, and thank you. Yep, I agree with everything. So I think one thing, as we start looking into building these policies and procedures, one question that's probably going to be asked, and that's why we have a claims person on here, quite frankly, is, what is the potential liability look like? What's the insurance look like? What are the ramifications if this does happen in my workplace? Do I need to be worried about anything? And I think really, and most of you have probably heard of Good Samaritan laws. And I think really in this situation, we can separate the Good Samaritan laws kind of into two categories. So the first, briefly, is individuals that are involved as a part of the illegal activity. So some states do have Good Samaritan laws to where if you're with people that are using illegal drugs and somebody gets ill, overdoses, you're able to either administer Narcan or call 911. And when the police show up, because you're trying to save somebody's life, then the Good Samaritan law kicks in and you may or may not be held accountable. So states vary with that type of law. The focus really today is more so on in a workplace situation or an environment where one person shows up and it appears that they're overdosing. What happens if we administer Narcan? What does that look like? Does that open us up to any legal liability? And the easy and short answer is no, it does not. So Good Samaritan laws are in place and by nature of a Good Samaritan. If you're taking an emergency action in good faith and it's reasonable under the circumstance, then you're protected under the Good Samaritan law. Virtually every state in the union has that type of law. They're worded a little bit differently, and some have been tried, some haven't. But I think generally it's safe to say that, again, as long as you're administering aid in good faith, then you're protected under the Good Samaritan law. So a couple of things to point out there. One, as we've discussed a little bit, in an overdose situation or even a non-overdose situation, if naloxone is administered and it's not an overdose, you're not making the situation worse. It's literally going to do virtually nothing to that individual. If it is an overdose, then by administering this, whether it works or not, you are attempting to save a life. So again, under the circumstance, it's reasonable that a Good Samaritan would want to save a life. So that's why you're protected under that group of laws. I mean, great examples, we've talked about it a couple of times, are AED machines, very similar. Administering CPR, there's been a lot of those cases out there that have actually been tried, and that's partially where the Good Samaritan law comes to. If you're giving CPR in good faith, trying to save somebody's life, you shouldn't be held accountable for example, breaking a rib. So very similar there. And again, like I said, it's I want to take a step back and just make sure that we're not trying to convince you or your company to do this or not do it. Again, this is really a conversation starter, and what we want to do is put some ammunition in your hands to go back to your companies and your places of work and say, this is something that's pretty important, and we're seeing more and more of it. Is it something that we need to take on? So finally, one question that's popped up with the prevalence of Narcan being readily available and being administered is, what does that look like if an employee gets hurt doing so? Or even in some situations where an overdose can be pretty traumatic. If there's a lot of people there could be some potential issues with employees bringing a workers' compensation claim. So we haven't seen a ton of this put to test yet. When I say put to test, that means litigated in the claims world. But in general, if you think about workers' compensation and how it works, you kind of really just revert back to the premise of workers' compensation, which is if somebody's in the course and scope of their employment and they get hurt because of their employment, then workers' compensation should apply. So there's a little bit of a gray area when it comes to injuries that may or may not be sustained when you're attending to an emergency in the workplace. But again, I kind of revert back to the fact that if the actions are in good faith, the employee or you were at work doing your work duties when this situation arose, there's a very strong argument that if any injuries are sustained, they should be compensable under the workers' compensation coverage. So a lot of things to think about there, but I think really the bottom line is when it comes to legal liability, it's very, very, very small chance that anybody's going to be held accountable for intervening in an overdosing type of situation. So with that being said, before I open it up to Q&A, I want to throw this out to both Colleen and Aaron. And we talk a lot about around the Miller Group how important our culture is, how important culture is to our clients and to our partners. In regard to the workplace culture and looking out for an employees, and I'll start with Colleen and then Aaron, you can jump in afterwards. Can you maybe leave us with some thoughts on, first what can be done, and maybe not even as specific to our own workplaces, but just in general to help prevent these types of crises. So to what can we do in the fight against the epidemics that our country's seeing with opioids and overdoses, and maybe individually, but both, what can companies do? And I'll answer my own question first, and then let the experts expand. But I think it is having discussions like this. I think this is an important first step in determining if these types of policies implemented. I mean, if you think about it, if every business in Kansas City had a policy similar to this, think of how many overdoses that we could potentially avoid. So I'm going to turn it back over to the experts. Colleen, any thoughts kind of to that big picture of the workplace culture and what we can do to be better stewards of these types of issues?
Yep, talk about it. Just like you said, Dustin, I think having conversation about it, having lunch and learns, things like that within your own organization, presenting about it, and then looking for the warning signs as you work with your employees and so forth like that. Again, when I'm throwing out warning signs, it could be a lot of different things that are going on with somebody and, their life. We don't know always what's going on with somebody. But if you do see somebody that is, maybe coming into work late, you see a change in behavior, and again, it could be a lot of things, but if we don't ask, we're not going to know. And so, again, if you see some, just some change in again, behavior, somebody that was always on time and now they're late, and it's just a good thing to ask them anyways, right? Because there could be a lot of different things going on in their life. And you don't always have to ask like, hey, I want you to talk to me about it. But what you could do is you can say, hey, we have an EAP program. I noticed there's been some changes recently. I just want you to know that we have, an employee assistance program. Here's the number if you need to talk to somebody. Just recognized, some signs. I just want you to know that there's help out there. You don't have to talk to me, but I want you to, feel free to reach out and get some help if you think that that's what you need. So again, EAP programs are really, really big. But I'm going to just reiterate what Dustin said. Talking about it, getting the word out is going to be the best way that people learn. It is, it's a pandemic. As we're looking at things, I mean, in the last 2 months we had, just on the news alone, I think there's been six deaths recorded in the last month of fentanyl overdose, laced in cocaine. So again, people have no idea what they're buying. They don't have any idea what they're injecting into their bodies, things like that. So I think that the more we talk about it, the more people learn, and it helps us to guide what it's going to look like in the future. But if everybody is hush hush about it, the stigma around drug use and all of that kind of stuff, we'll never, we'll never get the word out, and we'll save less lives that way. So again, I'm going to just leave it with this. The more you talk about it, the more people know, the more knowledge they have. And that's what I'm going to say about that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Aaron, anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I think you guys were right on. I think demystifying and talking about it will create an opportunity for growth and knowledge about what's actually going on, and then additionally allow there to be opportunity for people to find a path for healing and well-being. And I don't want us to also think that this is directly going to be someone maybe that works right here with you at your office or your business or your location where you are. It could be a family member that your employees that have, and this could be something very difficult. When you have employees that have difficulties at home, that spills over to their work life as well. And I think when you're invested culturally in your staff, you'll know when there's things going on at home that are affecting them at work as well. And the information you're sharing about this at work may not be something that affects them directly, but indirectly affects them. And you may save someone that's important to them and valued to them and creates a better well-being of their home And if we don't talk about it, there's no opportunity for that knowledge to be, help them. And additionally, Colleen mentioned EAPs. There's all sorts of other programs, if you have, religious programs with pastoral care and counseling, those things are always available. Sometimes those work, well. There is, counseling programs. There's definitely all sorts of treatment programs that are out there. And then, trying to get information to people so they can make good decisions if they can, and then help guide them to those. And I think that's going to be the ultimate way that I think we continue to make this kind of come around where this isn't a crisis anymore. And it's something that we're trying to, right now we're just trying to get our arms around it. And I think eventually, if we get to that point, we can hopefully manage it more effectively. So.
Excellent. So real quickly, I want to thank both Aaron and Colleen for their thoughtful commentary. I mean, I think we could probably extend this out a few hours and have a really good discussion. But again, hopefully we've started the conversation enough to where you know where to go, or at least where to start and having these conversations. And we want to open it up to some Q&A. In fact, we already got a great question, and I think everybody can see it. But if you can, I'm going to read it just so everybody knows. Thanks, Cheryl. It says, work in a social service agency that serves families and children. We're looking at adopting a policy related to our workers carrying naloxone as they work in the community with families. Are there any different concerns with this scenario? So just to rephrase that, and Cheryl, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the difference a little bit from what we've been talking about is having it on site within your building, within your workspace, et cetera. But your question is a great one. What does that look like? Colleen, I'll start with you to see if you've got experience with this. What does it look like if you have mobile employees that are out and about? Does it make sense for them to carry Narcan? I can see you by shaking your head. Yes, 100%. That was an easy question. The hard one is, can you think of any other scenarios that may pose a risk as far as additional training or policies, procedures, et cetera, with that type of scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we request of our staff is that they do a Narcan training. Again, we have the public health department come in and do our training for us. She does it as often as we need her to do it. So as we hire new employees, she's in here doing the training, so forth like that. So all we require is that they do the training and they get a box of Narcan and they get to carry it with them. Again, like I said, I carry a box in my purse. And so I have under me, I have probably about 20 community workers that work out in the community. They all have a box that they carry with them, whether it's on their person or in their vehicle. They have a box readily available to use if they needed it. We do work with a lot of substance clients that use substance. And so we're always prepared if and when we need to do that. So I don't believe that there would be any concerns with the scenario that you just presented, Cheryl. Again, I would just talk with your, with your HR, your QI person, and just make sure that you have some kind of policy. Sorry, my watch is listening to me. Some kind of policy that, just states what it is that you guys want to do in your organization. But again, it's over the counter now. Anybody can get it. So the reality of that is anybody can have it and anybody can use it now.
And Aaron, I'm going to let you jump in too here in just a second with any thoughts that you may have. But Janelle, another good question, and kudos to Janelle. They have a policy, a product, and the training. One thing in their policy is that only a trained person can administer naloxone, Narcan, whatever brand you have. She's asking, should that be changed? So I'll let maybe Aaron take a poke at that. I think my 2 cents is, what's your definition of a trained person, right? According to Colleen, the health department will come in and give you the training right then and there, and you're considered trained. So that's my 2 cents. And Aaron, thoughts?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's difficult to determine, what is the definition of trained? Like who is the arbiter of information in this? The information is free to you now. And so ultimately, I think OSHA has a standard of saying you have a competent person, you have an authorized person. I think in this capacity, because the information is so readily available and it is so straightforward, that it can be put on 3 slide decks of lace, spray, stay. There's not much more training that needs to be there. Now, I think if you're going to go to a point of we're doing injections and things like that, now maybe we need to have somebody like the health department come in, because then that creates, we are sticking people with a needle. So maybe there's something there. There's also the bloodborne pathogens, concern. What do you do with a needle when you're done? There's a lot more to follow through with. But at the same time, I think if you determine who your competent person is internally, they create a training program. You are consistent with how you train individuals coming in and out. If you don't feel that you have someone in your region like the Wyandotte County Health Department that would come out and do that, then if you're in the middle of Kansas or somewhere like that, and you don't have someone that can come to you easily, I don't see why you could not typically go ahead and develop your own training program as long as it's documented and you're making sure everyone's signed in and you record the entire amount of training. If that's the way I would look at it. Do you feel it's probably a good approach, Colleen, from your standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like we said, training is going to be different for everybody. And the way that I look at it, and again, I'm going to show you my box. Here's your training. You don't need much more than that. It is a very, very easy product to use. Even the injectable, the syringe PCS, there's a few more steps to it, but just as easy to use. And if anybody, you can literally Google search how to administer Narcan, and there will be a million videos that you can incorporate into a training on how to administer Narcan or Naloxone. And so again, you can develop your own training pretty quickly. And when I say the health department comes in and trains us, it's literally like a 15-minute training. And that is more her talking. The actual video to learn how to use Naloxone in a spray form is 3 minutes long. And again, it's just because they go through, the process of how to do it. And so it's not long. It's not anything that's, super, you don't have to, be at a nurse level or anything like that to know how to do this. And quite honestly, we hand out Narcan. I'm going to say this kind of funny, but we hand it out like candy. And the reason why is because, again, in my organization, we work with a lot of clients that use substance. And we want them to make sure that if they're out in their camp, in wherever they're at, using the drugs, I don't even know how many times people have saved people's lives. Drug users have used Narcan to save other people. Like they're like, oh man, And so again, anybody can use it and anybody can learn how to use it. So that's kind of my spiel on that as well. It's not hard. I'd rather you guys take 3 minutes and look up a video and again, save a life.
Excellent. Great thoughts, great words. Just wonderful commentary. Thank you so much. We've got just a couple of minutes left. If there's any other questions out there, if you rather speak than type, I think you can get unmuted and ask a question or share a comment. Anybody else have anything? Okay, well, if you're like me after a webinar, you won't think of that question until 3:30 this afternoon. So please feel free to, and Amanda's going to close here in just a second for us, but please feel free to reach out. I think, one question, especially those that maybe don't have a policy in place yet, that may ask is, well, okay, we know all this stuff now. This is wonderful. Where do we start? What's our starting point? Who's our first call? I would encourage you to give us a call. Give Aaron a call, give myself a call, give your broker a call. Hopefully that's us. Let us start the conversation with you. Let us get you in connection with the experts and help you build that policy. One other question: it seems that a policy that limits who can use would be more dangerous than the alternative. Great comment, Cheryl. I agree 100%. And to everybody's point here today, and I loved it. Colleen held up the box and opened it up and said, "Here's your training." I mean, literally, that's the training that you would go through. So I think it's certainly something that there shouldn't be anything on the surface that really scares you away from implementing these types of procedures and policies.
Right. And I'm going to just throw it out there. If anybody needs a quick clip or anything like that, I do have the one that we use from our health department. I will let Aaron and Dustin and Amanda, if you reach out to them, they can definitely get that from me. I can even put a quick little training tool together for anybody that needs it. I would rather you guys know how to use it, get it out there, get the word out there to your people, than for it to end here. So again, if there's any way that I can assist or help anybody learn further, I'm more than happy to do that for you all.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, with that being said, Amanda, I'm going to throw it back over to you for your parting words.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining us. Just please watch your email because we will send out a message that has a link to the recording, some of the resources we mentioned today, and if you have 15 seconds or less, you can complete our feedback survey, which is very quick. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and have a good afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.